Bienvenidos. Sí. ¿Se oye bien? Can you hear me? Thank you. My name is Eduardo Parra Colina. That's my mother's last name. Beautiful. And a couple years ago, I decided to become U.S. citizen in this very important country in my life because I'm from Mexico. Mexico is like my mother and United States is like my father. Both bring different aspects that are important, and all these years I feel lucky that I'm being blessed by the music gift and art. And all these years I've been living here in the United States and being an activist and a humanist because I believe we need to take a stand for our rights. People have died for what we have now today, and we should continue working in that process and embrace who we are. Soy de Veracruz, improvisador. Mi verso es mi voz. Cantamos antes de hablar, bailamos antes de caminar. Somos la voz del mundo. Hay que luchar por siempre. Hay que conservar nuestra libertad. Hay mucha sangre derramada que tanta gente ha regado como para quedarnos acostados, dormidos a descansar. No podemos dejar en las manos del enemigo nuestra libertad. No, no podemos dejar de luchar. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Y no importa tu color, si eres blanco, amarillo, negro, si eres raza de bronce o eres algo más. Los principios no son de una sola raza, no son de una sola casa, no son de una sola causa. La humanidad somos todos unidos en libertad. Hay que luchar por nuestros principios, pues nuestra libertad es una, es una, es una unidad en la que todos participamos, colaboramos, ejercitamos y hasta luchamos. Olé, 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 olé. Salías del templo un día, llorona, cuando al pasar yo te vi. Salías del templo un día, cuando al pasar yo te vi. Qué hermoso huipil llevabas, ay, llorona, llorona, mi libertad. Llegaste al puerto de Nueva York y te instalaste en la entrada con la lámpara de libertad. Ay de mi llorona, llorona de ayer y hoy. Are you Chantel by chance? Chantel? No. A friend of mine said that she was coming. She's getting married. She's checking in the music. tengo pena, porque no me ven llorar. Dicen que no tengo pena, porque no me ven llorar. Hay muertos que no hacen ruido, es más grande su penar. Hay muertos que no hacen ruido y es más grande su penar. Ay, me duele el mundo, tantas divisiones, unos con otros matándose por religiones. Me duele mi pueblo, me duele mi tierra. Si seguimos así, no habrá más lugar de vivir. Unos se odian, otros se matan, otros se atacan, otros discuten. Muchos hablan de paz, pero te dan con el rifle y el cañón y el fusil. Te llegan a matar si te opones y te llegan a desangrar también. No entiendo este mundo, señores, la paz cuesta tanto dolor. Ay de mí, llorona, llorona de ayer y hoy. Ay de mí, llorona, llorona de ayer y hoy. Ay de mí, bombero, 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 borón, bombero, bombero, borón, bombero, bombero, borón, bombón. Ole, 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 Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Veracruz Blues. I want you give a hand, big hand to Will, the tech guy. Because without the sound system, the sound tech, we don't sound good here. Thank you. I came here 30 years ago with only $20 in my pocket. And a lot of dreams. This song is about freedom. And how much blood has cost to have the freedom that we have now today. I'm being thankful to all who died in the past for our freedom, for our rights. And living in this country is a privilege. Or in any place in this earth. Vivo en un país libre, cuán solamente quiere ser libre en esta tierra y en ese instante. Y soy feliz porque soy gigante. Amo a una mujer clara que amo y me ama sin pedir nada. O casi nada, que no es lo mismo pero es igual. Silvio Rodríguez, cubano. Y si esto fuera poco, tengo mis cantos que poco a poco muelo y rehago habitando el tiempo. Como le cuadra a un hombre despierto, soy feliz, soy un hombre feliz y quiero que me perdonen por este día los muertos de mi felicidad. Soy feliz, soy un hombre feliz y quiero que me perdonen por este día los muertos de mi felicidad. La 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 Y si esto fuera poco, tengo mis cantos que poco a poco muelo y rehago habitando el tiempo. Como le cuadra un hombre despierto, soy feliz, soy un hombre feliz y quiero que me perdonen por este día los muertos de mi felicidad. Soy feliz, soy un hombre feliz y quiero que me perdonen por este día los muertos de mi felicidad. Por este día los muertos de mi felicidad. Por este día los muertos de mi felicidad. Thank you so much. porque no engraso los ejes, me llaman abandonado. Porque no engraso los ejes, me llaman abandonado. Si a mí me gusta que suenen, pa' que los quiero engrasados. Si a mí me gusta que suenen, pa' que los quiero engrasados. No necesito silencio, pues no tengo en quién pensar. No necesito silencio, yo no tengo en quién pensar. Tenía pero hace tiempo, ahora ya no tengo a nadie. Tenía pero hace tiempo, ahora ya no tengo a nadie. Cuando llegará, llegará el bohío. Oye, cuando llegará, llegará el bohío. Un día monté a caballo y en el monte me metí. Un día monté a caballo y en la selva me metí. Y sentí que un gran silencio crecía dentro de mí. Y sentí que un gran silencio crecía dentro de mí. Cuando llegará, llegará el bohío. Oye, cuando llegará, llegará el bohío. No necesito silencio, yo no tengo en quién pensar. No necesito silencio, yo no tengo en quién pensar. Tenía, pero hace tiempo, ahora ya no tengo a nadie. Tenía, pero hace tiempo, ahora ya no tengo a nadie. Si se calla el cantor, calla la vida, porque la vida misma es todo un canto. Puede el cantor ser luz sobre los prados, iluminando siempre a los de abajo. Que no calle el cantor, porque el silencio cobarde apaña la maldad que oprimen. No saben los cantores de agachadas, no pararán jamás de frente al crimen. Tenemos que hacer conciencia, no hay que dejar nuestra libertad en manos del opresor. Hay que salir a votar y votar por nuestros derechos. Tenemos el derecho de la Constitución para vivir en libertad. Pero cuidado, hermanos, esa libertad te la quieren arrebatar. Yo tengo tantos hermanos que no los puedo contar. En la pampa, la montaña, en la selva y en el mar. Gente de mano caliente, por eso de la amistad. Con un rezo para rezarle, con un lloro para llorar. Y así seguimos cantando, unidos en libertad. Con mi hermano, con mi hermana, luchando por libertad. Yo tengo tantos hermanos que no los puedo contar. Y una hermana muy hermosa que se llama libertad. Thank you so much. My first song, I wrote the next one song. I wrote them when I was 18 years old. Since that age, you need to make una más. Esta canción la escribí para el campesino. I wrote this song for the people that work in agriculture with any rights, very low income, very poor condition, and that was over, wow, incredible, almost 50 years ago. And guess what? Still the same. Campesino. Muy de mañana el campesino se levanta con el sol y su figura solitaria se dirige al sembradío. Y su figura solitaria se dirige al sembradío. Muy avanzada la tarde, se retira con el sol y su figura cansada del sembradío se aleja. Y su figura cansada del sembradío se aleja. Desde que tiene memoria, su rutina es trabajar para sacar de la tierra lo que ya le quiera dar. Para sacar de la tierra lo que ya le quiera dar. Arando va el campesino, va llevando el sol a cuesta, abriendo un surco en la tierra en donde siembra sus penas. Y así ha transcurrido el tiempo sin que nada haya cambiado, desde abuelo hasta nieto. Esta tierra han trabajado, desde abuelos hasta nietos. Esta tierra han trabajado, recibiendo tantas promesas que en promesas han quedado, de un gobierno que a tus costillas progresa, dejando el campo olvidado. Oh, pobrecito campesino, ay qué pena que me das. Y aunque gritas tu miseria, Si dejas la tierra, no comemos los demás. Hoy no salió a trabajar el campesino, se quedó el campo esperando. Llevan en anda su cuerpo los vecinos al cementerio cargando. Oh, mira qué ironía de las cosas, lo que sucede contigo. Pues tu cuerpo inerte que hoy reposa tiene en la tierra su abrigo. Mira qué ironía de las cosas, lo que sucede contigo. Pues tu cuerpo inerte que hoy reposa tiene en la tierra su abrigo. Tiene en la tierra su abrigo. Tiene en la tierra su abrigo. Thank you so much.
Hello. We appreciate the presentation of the compañero. Now we're going to do a little ceremony.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo. So we're going to have Yusef Miller come up, please, to give you a formal welcome and land acknowledgement. He's the executive director of Activist San Diego.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be here in the World Beat Center as usual, and welcome to everybody that came here. We're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. Again, my name is Yusef Miller. I'm the executive director of Activist San Diego, and also representing here KNSJ Radio, the People's Radio Station. We are standing here on unceded territory of the Kumeyaay and Payacuwicham. You may know of them as the Luiseños, but they call themselves the Payacuwicham. This land has been taken and stolen. They are bloodied but unbowed. They stand here in representation of their heritage. They stand here in representation of their honor and tradition. And we, as guests on this land, should honor the tradition of the land, the air, and the sea in a way that reflects the tradition of our indigenous brothers and sisters. And when I say indigenous brothers and sisters, I mean North, Central, and South America indigenous brothers and sisters. To not follow this type of land acknowledgement and land appreciation is suicidal to no matter who you are in the human family. We want to reach back to the wisdom of our brothers and sisters and acknowledge the land that they stand on, acknowledge the treatment of the land, the treatment of one another, in respect of their tradition. We honor the struggles that they have been through the missions, through the boarding schools, and the massacres that they've been through in this land, and they're still here, bloodied but unbowed. I know about being bloody. I know about being unbowed as a person of African American descent in this nation. I give this land acknowledgement as a stolen man on a stolen land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, al compañero. The other thing we're going to appreciate as a thank you for the Gorby Center, Makeda, always nice with us. And we're going to invite the people in case they feel like it's a kitchen available, it's some food available. It's a way we're giving a respect to the people who let us use this place. We're going to appreciate in case somebody needs some food on the staff. We're going to appreciate you guys go the way and get what you want. Okay. Then we're going to the Paro Makeda, the director, executive director of the center. We're going to have a little welcome for everybody.
Thank you. I just want to welcome all of you here to the World Beat Cultural Center. And this center, it had a lot of trials and tribulations to be here in Balboa Park. We're here, and this is the home of humanity. You know, all cultures as one. So welcome. And we have an incredible guest, and he's been working as an activist ever since he was 13 years of old. So you got a really good treat. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for being conscious. And we need World Beat Centers in every town. Thank you.
Okay. Next in the program, we have the greetings of different organizations present. And we're going to start with the compañero from Veterans for Peace.
Thank you, Augustine. Good to meet you. Gracias. It's good to see some fine fellows here tonight and gals that haven't seen in a little while. This is a wonderful place to meet. We've met here many times, and Makeda has always welcomed us. Tonight, Veterans for Peace is joining with some other groups in the house, like the Peace Resource Center with Michael here, and Activist San Diego with the groups that are here from there, to have a big Zoom program, a Saturday, the 24th, at 3 in the afternoon. It's a national program on ending wars. How many of you want to end this goddamn war in the Middle East? Anybody? One way to do that is to put pressure on the people that are running for Congress, running for Senate, and the two that are running for president, to let them know we want to get out of there and stop using our bullets and bombs to kill 40,000 of the Palestinians. They eliminated 1,200 Jews in the first attack. But 40,000 people, and the homes and the hospitals and everybody else's house is gone. We've got to make a place for them when they come back, too. And the present leaders in charge of Israel don't want this to happen. And the United States is still supplying them. So what do we got to do? We got to keep the pressure going, and it's starting to work. They're changing a little bit on what we're doing. And anybody here that wants to participate in this Zoom call, call my email address, Pacer, P-A-C-E-R, if you want to write it down, jp3@gmail.com, and we'll get a reservation sent to you so that you know how to come on. P-A-C-E-R, jp3@gmail.com. I need your email address to send it back to you if you want to join in. Norman Solomon will be the principal speaker, but every other group that's participating is going to be represented there. And we're going to try to do what we need to do to get the change. I don't know if you remember Jimmy Carter's book on apartheid in Palestine. He said it was worse than what was going on in South Africa, and it's still taking place today. They're taking land from the people that have owned it for 20, 50, 100 years for settlements. And this has been going on for a long time before that attack on October 7th. And now 40,000 people are dead because of it. It's got to change. And we need your help in doing it. So thank you for letting us say that. P-A-C-E-R, JP3 @gmail.com. Lucilla, you would be very welcome on the program, and you too, Augustine. I know Michael is going to be on it. He's head of the Peace Resource Center, one of the big supporters. And people from Activist San Diego have already planned to be on it. So you'll be joined with a lot of good friends. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. You will be getting an email from me. And now somebody from DSA. Oh, yes, thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Connor. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the current internal organizing chair of the San Diego chapter of Democratic Socialists of America. I'm going to start by reminding our special guest where we are. We're in San Diego. In San Diego, it's pretty easy to get lulled into a sense of apathy. You know, we've got the great weather, we've got the beach, we've got a corporate Democrat political machine, we're in a deep blue state that's going to stay deep blue for the foreseeable future. But here in San Diego, we've also got the highest cost of living in the country. And one of the largest unhoused populations in the country. We've got a Democratic establishment that is intent on continuing to increase the layers of punitive punishment of the unhoused and increase surveillance in our black and brown communities. And 25 minutes south, we've got a militarized border wall, and we have seen firsthand in open-air detention sites that our immigration system is designed to terrorize migrants with unnecessary and unjust cruelty. And while the Democrats are failing us in a lot of ways, here and federally, things are going to get a lot worse if we lose the federal government to the Republican Party, and if the far right continues to flourish in our country. Calls for mass deportation, continued rollback of reproductive and LGBTQ rights are all on the Trump agenda, and the agenda doesn't stop there. So we're in a complicated place. While we see an emergent, powerful, global far right, we've also got a Democratic Party who insists on stamping out dissent and making untenable political decisions, particularly when it comes to their support of an active ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza. So what are we to do? We need to be strategic. We have to be firmly united to defeat the far right and continue to push for something different than the current status quo. The way we defeat the far right is by pushing for a politics that actually helps working people here and around the world. We need to connect with people in our community, or we will continue to lose them to far right ideology. It's not as simple as defeating the far right in this election. We need to definitively beat their ideology in our communities and our families, and eliminate the viability of their movement as a political project. DSA believes in doing that by organizing within our communities through labor, tenant, electoral, and environmental organizing to meet people where they're at and fight for a better future here and a socialist future on the horizon. Now, we've got a diverse set of opinions within DSA and certainly within this room about how we can unite against fascism and fight for a better future, and how we thread that needle of fighting against this immediate and existential threat without losing our long-term vision. So I look forward to our discussion today with Comrade Bill Fletcher Jr., a longtime labor activist, longtime internationalist, longtime civil rights activist, and longtime DSA member. All right, thank you, cheers.
You know, the main reason we have this meeting with all you guys is because we see the situation very alarmistic. Only to think a right-winger and his people behind the big corporations can take the power in this country is something we really care. And I think is the reason that most of you are here. We really care about what's going on in the country, and we're willing to do whatever is possible to avoid that possible scenario.
I come from Mexico, and in Mexico, when we see the U.S. Elections, you know, all my life, it's not that foreign, even though it's foreign. It's a foreign country, but it affects our country. Whatever happens on this side, whoever gets elected on this side, their policies are going to dictate a lot of what happens in Mexico and in the world, not just in Mexico, right? So I've always been very conscientious about the political scene in the United States, because it makes a huge difference, you know. So this election, before Biden dropped out, I was very pessimistic about the future, thinking, oh my goodness, this new Confederacy is coming, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And now there's a little bit of hope. Not that I don't see the alternative as the best thing in the world for me, but I do see that there is some hope that at least we have a fighting chance. We have a chance to continue fighting. We have a chance to continue living. And that's why I think it's very important for us to get together here today and listen to what Brother Bill has to say. I'm really looking forward to creating a coalition to fight this new Confederacy, this fascism that is lurking and really, really near. So I really look forward to hearing from you. You want to come up? So Bill Fletcher is an activist. He's been an activist for many years, fighting for racial justice in the workers' movement and international solidarity. He is also author of many books that we have some of his books available at the table over there. So without further ado, brother, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. I want to thank the World Beat Center. I want to specifically thank Sister Makeda for providing us a space and for the hospitality and the support. I want to thank my comrades from Liberation Road and others that have put together this evening's event. So I want to start with this. It's something that had hit me recently, and I talked a little bit about at the Southern Workers Assembly about a week ago, that for many presidential election cycles, we've been hearing this is the most important election of our lifetime. And we've heard it so many times that some people think it's just rhetoric. It's just, I'm tired of hearing that. But the problem is that we're missing the point, because each of those elections were the most important elections of our lifetime, because there's a significant polarization that has been unfolding in this country, such that we're living in what can be called a cold civil war. A cold civil war in which one side actually wants to make it hot. And so each election, as there's been this political realignment, has become more and more intense, and clear. And I want to talk tonight about how it is that we got there. Because within the left and within many segments of the progressive movement, there has been denial about how serious the threat is. People put it off. They either think that the institutions of U.S. constitutional democracy will self-correct, sort of like a computer, and will render irrelevant these forces on the far right. And it doesn't work that way. It hasn't in history, and including in the United States. So one of the things to keep in mind is that there are periodic ruling consensus that break down. And you see it within U.S. history, that there was a ruling consensus that broke down in 1860 that resulted in the Civil War. There was another breakdown in the ruling consensus in the 1870s, which ended Reconstruction. We've seen other breakdowns, like in 1932, when Franklin Roosevelt was elected. His politics introduced a significant change over what preceded it, and the ruling circles were not in unity on that. They were so much not in unity that a segment of them started to plot a coup. And they enlisted a Marine Corps general named Smedley Butler, or they attempted to enlist him, to organize veterans to march on Washington and to either unseat Roosevelt or to insist that Roosevelt appoint Butler as sort of a proconsul, a de facto dictator. When Butler declined to do this, he went before the Congress to basically blow the whistle on these capitalists, and something very interesting happened. Within Congress and within the media, people started to act like he was exaggerating, that it really wasn't that bad, that this may really not have happened, and history has pushed that away. Most of us probably didn't know, until you might have listened to Rachel Maddow's podcast, that in 1940-41, there was a Nazi plot to unseat the US government that included the possible insurrections in state capitals, which is, by the way, relevant to the November election. And we'll come back to that in a second. And this plot was stopped. Now, after World War II, there was a new ruling consensus because of the Cold War that the US and the British had initiated. And it was able to hold together segments of the ruling class that would have otherwise been at war with one another. And there was a lot of acceptance of, despite protests, various economic policies that had come out of the New Deal. But that starts to break down. And it starts to break down in the late 1960s, early 1970s, when the US economy starts to slow down, but not slow down for most of us, slow down for the capitalists. They weren't getting the kind of profits that they had been getting in the immediate aftermath of World War II. And it was in that context that the 1970s becomes a period of transition economically, with the breakdown of New Deal economics and the emergence of what came to be known as neoliberal economics, or what Bernie Sanders calls capitalist fundamentalism, and what some of my friends call capitalism on crack. And that's basically what we started to see in the 1970s on. And at the political level, of course, when Ronald Reagan comes in, he more fully introduces this. But that's only part of the story, and that's part of the story, at least on the economics, that many of us have heard at least elements of. But there's another part that's really, really important. In the aftermath of the Goldwater campaign in 1964 and the failure of that campaign, elements within the Republican Party who had backed Goldwater do go through an assessment of what needs to be done and what was wrong with the Goldwater campaign. And to some extent, the Goldwater campaign was a transitional campaign. It was a transition from the politics of the 1950s and the white response to the civil rights movement. And it was going towards something else, but it wasn't fully developed. critical members of the Goldwater campaign, like Richard Viguerie and Paul Weyrich, began to start to rethink strategy for what the right needed to do. And they began to construct what I would call a plan for the overthrow of the 20th century. Their objective was to turn back all of the victories, not just the civil rights victories, all of the victories that we had won in the 20th century. And they began this, and they were brilliant. I mean, you have to give them credit for their brilliance and for their long-term projection. Because see, as opposed to many of us on the left who react, we react, we react, we react, and if we plan, it's maybe 6 months in advance. These people were thinking decades in advance. And they developed a long-term strategy that had several different levels. And the levels included electoral politics and legislation, litigation, and mass movements, and a developing role in the media, an expansion of their role in the media that was made easier when there was deregulation. Now, people like Viguerie and Weyrich also saw something else. They watched very carefully the campaigns of George Wallace from Alabama, and they were struck that George Wallace did something very visionary. He moved out of the South, and he moved into the North. And Viguerie and Weyrich saw that the Wallace campaign and message was resonating with many white ethnics who were starting to feel that they were overlooked and that they were being displaced by the rising social movements of marginalized populations. So they watched this. Richard Nixon also watched this. And Richard Nixon's campaign was pivotal because he introduced what was called the Southern Strategy, which we should understand was not a Southern strategy, it was a white people's strategy. It really was. It was a strategy to convince white people that the Republican Party was the non-black party and that the Democrats were the black party. Now, it's critical we understand when this is taking place. 1960s. This is happening before neoliberalism. Now, I say that because there's many people on the left that say, well, more white people would still be with the Democratic Party were it not for its embrace of neoliberalism. No, 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 no. This starts to happen before that. In fact, when the Civil Rights Act is passed and the Voting Rights Act is passed, it was Lyndon Johnson that said the Democratic Party had lost the South for at least a generation. And it turns out he was optimistic. So this transition starts, and Viguerie and Weyrich are watching this. And this becomes critical because they're trying to decide, should they start a third party? They were. You know, whether they should go the route that George Wallace was initially thinking. And they decide, no, what we're going to do is we're going to operate within the Republican Party. And we're going to carry out a strategy to push the Republican Party further and further to the right. And that's what they embark on. And they begin by carrying out an alliance with a man that they despised. And that man was Richard Nixon. They despised Richard Nixon because they looked at him as a traitor to conservatism. They looked at him as a liberal. But what they understood better than many of us on the left is that you don't have to like certain people in order to engage in an alliance. You have to determine whether there's certain interests that you have that can be advanced by a certain type of an alliance. And that's what they decided. And by aligning with him, they positioned themselves in order to influence congressional appointments, to develop institutions like the Heritage Foundation and others, and to get the space that they needed in order to advance, and in order to ultimately help to contribute to the rise of this guy named Ronald Reagan, who was definitely not a Nixon 2.0. He was someone with very different politics. and representing a different constituency. They also started to identify religious constituencies, and as you may know, there was a coup d'etat in the National Rifles Association that converted the NRA from an organization that had mainly been about hunters, gun safety and things like that, into a very radical right-wing force, turning the issue of gun ownership into a much more a deeper issue where they were drawing lines and aligning themselves explicitly with the right. A politics that grows out of the history of gun ownership in the United States, as Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz pointed out, that was rooted in both settler colonialism and racial slavery. And the NRA re-embraced that, and it became another component of this developing neo-Confederate bloc that is moving and was moving the Republican Party and pushing aside the so-called liberals. And there was a liberal element within the Republican Party. There were people like Nelson Rockefeller and Jacob Javits. And it's inconceivable today to imagine them in the party. Even a few years back when Colin Powell spoke at the Republican convention, which I think it was in 2004, and he considered himself, he was a Republican, considered himself a liberal Republican, and what he had to say was completely irrelevant to the audience. There was no base for what he was saying. It was not resonating. He was out of touch with who the Republican Party had become because the new right had essentially taken it over. So we end up having Reagan come in, begin this neoliberal offensive, and also embrace right-wing Christian denominations. And we start to see this very central role in the Republican Party for people that we would now call white Christian nationalists. So they're making this block. And while they're making this block, they're focusing largely on the local level, even not pushing Reagan to go but so far. They're moving at the local level, and one of the most important moves that they make at the local level was to take over state legislatures to do two things. One, to pass resolutions calling for a constitutional convention, and the second was to pass statutes so that if Roe v. Wade was ever overturned, there would be a tripwire that would allow those states to automatically introduce repressive anti-women legislation. While they were doing that, liberals were relying on the courts, believing that Roe v. Wade was untouchable, that it would never be reversed, that it might be weakened at some point, there might be some dipping and dabbing, but that it would never be reversed. The right wing understood that their strategy was such that ultimately they knew that they would take over the courts. They wanted to have a situation that once they did, bingo, things could move at warp speed at the state level, and they succeeded. That's what I mean by a multi-decade strategy. They had a long-term plan. And while many of us had our high hopes for what the courts would do to defend us, or what one or another president would do to defend us, the right wing was moving at the base, constructing a movement that was very successful. One of the things about their building mass movements, which I think is very important in understanding the Tea Party and then MAGA, was that what the right did with mass movements, anti-busing, anti-abortion, guns, anti-Panama Canal Treaty, this is the 1970s, was that they had a united front view in building these mass movements. In other words, when they would build an anti-busing movement, they didn't ask people their position on abortion. They didn't ask people their position on guns. If you were anti-busing, you were welcomed in. If you were anti-Panama Canal Treaty and that movement, they didn't ask you your position on abortion, guns, or busing. They asked, what's your position in the Panama Canal Treaty? Okay, you're in. And then through the cadre that they had created, that were operating in these movements, they were able to work with people, shifting people's point of view, shifting the culture of these organizations to make people more interested and open to a broader right-wing framework. Now, what do? We progressives. Well, I'll tell you what happened in the anti-Iraq war movement. I was one of the founders of United for Peace and Justice, the largest of the anti-war groups. And we were dogged by another coalition, which will go nameless. But if you whistle a tune, I'll confirm the song. And we were dogged because we let people in, regardless of their points of view on multiple issues, as long as they opposed the Iraq war. As opposed to some other people said, no, you have to have a clear position on Korea, you have to have a clear position on this, on that, on this and that. Exactly the opposite of what the right has done. And so we end up chasing people away in the name of purity of ideology, right? Waving the flag as our ship is going down. So maybe that is something that people feel good about, that they can see a little bit of the skyline as the water is rising, rising, rising over their heads. Just maybe. With the end of the Cold War, towards the end of the Cold War, the ruling consensus starts breaking up. And we started to see that in different elements. So in the Midwest in the 1980s, there's this fascist movement that develops, and it's based largely among white farmers. It was represented by groups like the Posse Comitatus and the Aryan Nation. And it is responding to the economic collapse of family farms and farming generally in the Midwest. And it was fascists that responded to that in armed, both armed and nonviolent forms of protest. But it became something that was very significant, and Costa Gavras actually even made a film about it called Betrayed. It's a commercial film, which I would actually recommend that people take a look at. And so we see this element, but again, many people, particularly if you are on one or the other coast, didn't pay attention to this because it was only happening in the Midwest. But there was something stirring. And it was this sort of politics, it's called revanchism. That's the term that they use in Europe. It's the politics of revenge and the politics of an assertion that something was taken from me and I'm going to get it back. And we start to see this politics of revanchism starting to spread, that things were allegedly taken from white people and they were given to the undeserving. Who were the undeserving? People of color. Who were the undeserving? Women, right? And were given to them. And the genuine, real people of this country suffered as a result. And so we start to see this revanchism spreading. When the Soviet Union collapses, the ruling consensus really starts to shatter. And in 1994, when Newt Gingrich leads Republicans in taking over Congress, there was a very different tone that you picked up. There was no longer this idea that honest people can disagree, even if they were cutting each other's throats in private, right? But there was none of that. It was much more this declaration of war that the so-called contract with America represented, that was followed shortly thereafter by the Oklahoma City massacre carried out by Timothy McVeigh, and the revelation that there were these armed right-wing groups around the country that were playing with the idea of civil war. Now, within the Republican Party, while this is happening, one of the things that's interesting is that the Republican establishment, by this time pretty much cleansed of liberals, has a de facto alliance with the far right and looks at the far right as an instrument that can advance and strengthen their position politically, their meaning the Republican establishment. The alliances with different elements of the far right, including the white Christian nationalists. And their alliance is, in my mind, very much akin to the alliance between Dr. Frankenstein and the monster. Dr. Frankenstein puts the monster together with the idea that he will control that monster. Turned out the monster had some other ideas. And so what we start seeing in the 90s and the 2000s is this monster is starting to develop, and the Republican establishment is placating it and encouraging it through the use of certain language as well as opening space. It encouraged when, in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing, there was an attempt to downplay the growth of these fascist groups. When Obama was elected, and DHS came out with a paper that identified the domestic terrorist threat, not from jihadists, but from white supremacists. People like John Boehner, who was then the Speaker of the House, and other Republicans condemned Obama and said, no, this is an attack on Republicans, this is an attack on gun owners, this is an attack on freedom of speech, etc. And Obama, being Obama, backed down and allowed this report, which is a very important report, to be basically pushed aside. When Obama was elected, which completely shocked the hell out of the far right, there was a moment in time when the administration could have done something very dramatic to move against the right, and they missed the opportunity, and I'll come back to that in a second, and instead opened up the door for the Tea Party movement within months. Now let me explain what I would argue Obama did wrong. How many of you have ever heard of the Battle of the Crater in the Civil War in 1864? Okay. Really? Okay. So let me tell you about it. It's really a fascinating story. So 1864, Union troops are moving on Petersburg, Virginia, and the Confederate forces had significant fortifications. The Union troops couldn't get through. So they came up with this brilliant idea. They were going to dig a tunnel underneath the fortifications, load the tunnel with massive explosives, and set off an explosion, blowing a hole in the Confederate line. And the idea was blow the hole in the Confederate line, and then Union troops should shoot through, because the Confederates would be stunned, rout the Confederates and get into Petersburg. Everything worked. They set off the explosion, massive explosion, creating this giant crater. Union troops went into the crater, and they stopped. They just sat there. And they looked around, and they looked at the body parts and what was left of the defenses, and they sat there. Well, the Confederates were running towards Petersburg until they realized they weren't being chased. They reorganized, came back, and massacred the Union troops. In November 2008, there was a massive explosion in the Republican line. They didn't expect it. And all of a sudden, we have Barack Obama as the president. Instead of chasing the other side and whipping their ass, they sat there and they said, well, we're going to be the adults in the room. And we're going to work this out. We'll be bipartisan. Even though the Republicans had said, Mitch McConnell said, this guy's going to be a one-term president. We are not going to cooperate with him. But that didn't matter. Obama was going to be the gentleman in the room, the adult. That gave several months during which time the right was able to reorganize their forces, come back, and start kicking our ass. And it took the form of the Tea Party. Now, many people thought the Tea Party, they called the Tea Party an AstroTurf movement. You might remember that. And people were laughing about them because there were all these rich people that were funding them. The problem was that was missing the point. It was missing that there was a real social base that the Tea Party was onto. And it was the same base that ultimately votes for Trump, and it was the middle strata in the population. It was not primarily white workers, contrary to what the liberals have said. It was the middle strata. It was well off to many skilled workers, but also a lot of small business people. There were various rich people, but it was mainly the middle strata that gravitated towards the Tea Party. But they tried to present themselves as speaking on behalf of basically the white masses. And they started to move, and they started to attack things like health care. And you might remember remember that famous picture? Government, take your hands off my Medicare, remember? And it was like, and so many of us laughed because Medicare is a government program. But we missed the point of what they were raising. What they were raising, because I mean, many of them are stupid, but they're not that stupid, right? What they were saying is they did not want something that they saw as benefiting them being spread out to go to the illegitimate population, the people that allegedly didn't work hard enough, that were undeserving. And then into this mix enters this failed businessman named Donald Trump, who begins this whole move around the birther question of questioning whether or not Barack Obama was a U.S. citizen. So the situation that we find ourselves in is not new. It has been growing. One could say it's been growing since 1607, but I'm going to say that it's been at least growing since the late 1960s in a new form. It's very dangerous. It's armed. And what has happened over the last number of years is that as they've watched demographic changes in the country and political shifts, the far right has determined that constitutional democracy is unnecessary, if not worse, that it gets in the way. And this is one of the reasons that you've started to hear Republicans say the United States was never supposed to be a democracy, it was supposed to be a republic. You've heard that, right? I mean, it's like, what are you talking about, right? Have you read the Constitution? But they're making these arguments to prepare. Another example, you've heard this thing where they say, well, the Constitution doesn't say there's a separation of church and state. How many of you have heard that? Okay, that's part of the white Christian nationalist argument, that there really is not supposed to be a separation of church and state. Well, look at the First Amendment, right? But they're making these arguments, and they're able to make them and improve them because of their relationship to the mainstream media and to the far-right media. The introduction of Fox News, which is an oxymoron, and which they actually have admitted is an oxymoron. They were forced in court to say that Fox News is not a news agency, it's an entertainment agency. But what they've done is that they've created a propaganda bubble around entire sections of our population where that becomes the sole source of information. And it reinforces different things, lies, etc., that people hear. But in addition to that, very orchestrated moves on AM radio, particularly in rural parts of the United States, talk programs, increasing influence of the right, and the consolidation of the media. So more and more of these right-wing forces are there. Okay, so I'm not trying to encourage us to commit suicide when we leave here. But I am trying to say that one of the mistakes that we've made is to underestimate the growth of the right. And many sections of the left have instead focused on attacks on centrist Democrats as being allegedly the main problem, as opposed to understanding that the far right, as it is in Hungary, as we see in Russia and a number of other places, and also Italy, is attempting to take over and to use the instruments of democracy to destroy it. And in that sense, it's different from the fascism of the 1920s and 30s, which was making a frontal assault on the so-called democratic capitalist state. These folks are saying, no, we will have democracy, but we'll have it modified. So you'll never win, for instance. And entire populations will be disenfranchised, but we still will have votes. We'll still have elections. But It will be harder for nonprofits to get funding. It will be harder for alternative news sources to emerge and to sustain themselves, but we will still have democracy. The icing on the cake for the far right is the issue of a constitutional convention. So let me just say a little bit about this, and I want to say something about fighting back. Most of us actually are unaware that this has been going on. It began a number of years ago when elements of the far right came to the conclusion that attempts to get a flat tax passed through Congress would never happen. And therefore, it would only happen if the Constitution was changed. So they began a very stealth move to have a constitutional convention. Now, the U.S. has only had one constitutional convention in 1787. The Constitution has been changed by amendments. But there are provisions for a constitutional convention. Congress can call it, and the states can call it. And if there are a certain number of states, I believe it's 2/3 or 3/4 of the states, that pass resolutions for a constitutional convention, it has to be held. Now, therein lies an interesting thing. What happens next? It's completely unclear, but what it appears is that there would be representatives from each state, but not in any kind of per capita basis. It would maybe be 2 representatives per state, and these folks would be authorized to change the Constitution of the United States. So we could leave a convention with, quite literally, the United Theocratic States of America, or the United Christian States of America. And it's not like you could go to the Supreme Court and say, wait a minute, this was unconstitutional. Knock, knock, we got a new Constitution. This has been something that the American Legislative Exchange Council has been moving quietly. And one of the things that all progressives need to do is to check and see whether their state legislature has ever, under any conditions, passed a resolution for a constitutional convention. If they have, we have to reverse it. Because there's no clarity as to how long that resolution needs to stay in the books for it to be valid. In other words, a state may have passed a resolution in 1960 that contributes towards that actual number. You can't make this stuff up. What's that? Just through any state legislator. Go to your state legislator and tell them, have one of your aides look into that. It's not hard to get that information. We need to do it, including in the blue state of California, because there may have been a resolution passed at some point. All right, so now we're looking at November and the situation in November. And so we need to be clear what the far right is anticipating. Through what we see in the passing of various laws, including most recently in Georgia, where they gave the power of the state legislature to void a certification of an election if they believe that that something may have been done and there had been insufficient investigation. So one of the things we have to anticipate is that they're going to flood the courts with lawsuits. Another thing we have to anticipate is intimidation. And it's already started. Intimidation of voters, intimidation of election officials. And as a way of addressing that. We have to also anticipate that caravans of fascists will converge on state capitals in order to ensure that elections either don't get certified or get certified the way that they want them to happen. I know this sounds dystopian, but this is the stuff that we have to prepare for, and many of us have thought it could never happen, but it can very well. Therefore, what do we need to do? Well, one of the things we need to do is something, I was co-founder of an anti-fascist worker group called Standing for Democracy. And one of the things that we've been saying is that we need to organize around the country so that when the fascists show up, we're there. And one of the things that's driven me crazy would be to turn on the news and watch these fascists go to school board meetings and intimidate school departments, demanding that they remove books, and there's no one there stopping the fascists. I'm saying, where are we? And as I said to some other folks last night, I know where we are. We're home tweeting. And we're texting our friends. And we're shaking our hands. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, why isn't someone doing something about it? Well, get off your ass and do something about it. We have to be there. One of my critical images is in Boston. 1980s, the Ku Klux Klan announced that they were going to march through Boston. I don't know why they made that announcement. I wouldn't have. And they made the announcement. And there were, I think, maybe 200 of them. And in one of the quickest organizing efforts I've ever seen, probably 1,000 or more anti-fascist people showed up and literally chased these guys out of town. Literally. I mean, they were running, and they didn't need cop protection and everything. Right? They were on their way out. We got to do this. Right now in Britain, you see what the fascists did. We're trying to manipulate a situation with the murder of these children, blame it on a Muslim immigrant who turned out to be Rwandan born in Britain. And they stirred things up using the media, and things were going to hell, and anti-fascists mobilized in their thousands. That is precisely what we're going to need to do. And we need to get organized now, not October 30th, now. Right? We need to start thinking now about, are we ready to get in the car and drive to Sacramento? Right? Are we ready to defend people at the polls when the fascists show up? What are we going to do if the fascists show up with guns? How do we make sure that we do not get provoked by the fascists? Like if the Proud Boys show up and try to encourage us to do something, how do we make sure that we don't get provoked? How do you handle that? We've got to be thinking about this stuff now. Now. Standing for democracy. For democracy. We're just getting started. And we're just getting started because in some ways we thought like other people were going to do it and like no one was. I mean, there's lawyers that are doing things, but there's really no one that's organizing workers against the fascists. And so we started developing an anti-sectarian organization to do that. We don't have a purity test. As long as you're not a fascist, you're welcome. And so, so that's the kind of stuff that we need to do. And I would encourage you in San Diego. San Diego, which not very long ago had a very well-armed fascist group that was running around in this city, in this otherwise progressive city. You know, it can happen here. And the other side wants that to happen. And they want us to be scared. And they want us to accept that nothing can happen, that nothing can be done to stop them. So let me make this sort of my final point. So I'm enthusiastically backing Kamala Harris, enthusiastically. Not because I have any illusions about her, but I have seen something in the last 3 weeks I have not seen. I can't remember when I've seen something like this. I mean, it's like, the moment that Biden withdrew, I was up in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I was going to this bookstore, and outside this bookstore, there was this guy selling these books. And, you know, I'm just being nice and said, hey, how you doing? I'm doing great. I haven't been doing this great and he goes on and tells me, now that Biden is out of the way, he is so excited. And I said, wow. And I've been seeing this around the country, that there's something resonating. People are inspired to fight back and have not fallen prey to fatalism and have turned away from a notion of acceptance of an inevitability. You know, I mean, Trump and the Republicans, they were crowing, right? They just knew they were stepping in, and now they're babbling. They don't know what to do. We have a chance to crush them, and it needs to be a decisive defeat. Because that's going to be very important in terms of how the election is interpreted in the media and in the courts. It can't be a slim. We've got to crush them decisively. But then, to borrow from my friend from DSA, and I was so glad you were raising this, we need to learn from France and the new Popular Front that it's not enough to say we're against the fascists. That, and we can't rely on the Democratic establishment either to say this, that we progressives need to be articulating a different vision. A vision that speaks to our base, that speaks to most people in this country who have been crushed by capitalism. We need to be speaking about the kind of platform that needs to happen. We need to be thinking much more strategically about running for office, winning power, and actually reshaping things, which means that we must be strategic. We must be strategic. You know, with all due respect to Cornel West, who I went to college with, you know, I respect his moral outrage, but the absence of strategy, particularly in a moment like this, is unacceptable. We need to be fighting to win. We can't simply be fighting to express our outrage. We can't simply be saying, I'm going to draw a line here. I want people to know I don't stand for this and that. Yeah, I got that. But do you want to win? Because if you have looked at Project 2025, you know damn well, unless you can't read or unless you're really high, that Project 2025 could mean any number of things, including the expulsion of millions of migrants, the locking up of many of us in this room, and I'm not exaggerating, the elimination of LGBTQ people. They want to annihilate LGBTQ people. The complete suppression and reassertion of male supremacy. The elimination of anything that approaches racial justice. The elimination of environmental regulations when our planet is burning. That's what they want. So don't talk to me about outrage. Don't talk to me about expressing your moral outrage. Talk to me about whether you're interested in winning. Because if you're not interested in winning, we have nothing to discuss. Thank you very much. Yeah. So, you have two options. One, we can have questions. Two, you can give me a standing ovation. Thank you, but I'm just joking. But thank you. I'm gonna have to remember that line. It was just supposed to be a joke. But no, there's questions and also, well, I'll save that to the end. We'll take a round of questions. Yes. Yes. I think you need a
Mic check.
hold it. Give him a microphone.
Can you hear me? Okay. You spoke at what's going on at the local level. We have to be as strong here as they are. You mentioned there's some fascist forces here. There are innumerable of them. And if those in the room get active and start speaking out, they'll attract many more people, like you say, because they're going to be trying to prevent the certification of this election so it goes in the House of Representatives and the Republicans win.
Right. No, that's right. And if we don't have the numbers, they'll pull it off. Other questions or comments? Yes. Go ahead.
In 1912, there was a massacre in San Diego. The Wobblies, the International Workers of the World, were not only massacred, they were kidnapped by vigilantes, forced to kiss an American flag, and, well, there are children here, so I won't say what they did, what else they did to these socialists. And this was done for the purpose of, and they also flattened Chinatown, the whole neighborhood of Stingery, and they did it for the purpose of the Panama, California exhibition, which built Balboa Park. And yeah, so they're really reshaping things, and I really like what you said, and I know I'm part of the education committee. Well, I'm the secretary of the education committee of DSA, and we have a video all about those things. And another thing we've been doing lately is we renamed a school. We renamed Henry Clay School, and we officially renamed the Andrew Jackson Post Office, but they still won't take the sign down. And anyway, I won't, you know, but I just appreciate what you're
Thank you.
saying, and there, you know, and I'm with you. Whatever, I'm following you.
Thank you very
wherever.
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Other questions? Thank you. Questions, comments? Yeah, go ahead, Bruce. Yeah.
What does that mean? United front, how broad or how narrow? What about a person like Lynn Cheney?
Right.
What about her? That's my question.
So let me give you an example of how to think about fronts. How many of you are baseball fans? Okay, good. All right, I'm happy. Okay, so a number of years ago, I was involved in trying to get an effort to get Curt Flood into the Hall of Fame. For those of you unfamiliar with who Curt Flood was, he died in '97. He was a St. Louis Cardinals outfielder, a brilliant player who the Cardinals were going to trade to the Philadelphia Phillies. He did not want to go. This was 1969. He did not want to go for a variety of reasons. But in baseball at that time, you had something called the reserve clause, which was like indentured servitude. You were owned by your team until you either resigned from baseball or they traded you. So he decided he wanted to file a lawsuit. He went to the Major League Baseball Players Association. The executive director, Marvin Miller, brilliant guy, said, this is going to be really tough, but we'll support you. And they questioned him to make sure he was serious about this. And he filed the lawsuit, and he lost. And in one of the strangest decisions the Supreme Court ever issued, they upheld the reserve clause. But the Curt Flood case shook up baseball. And a few years later, using a very interesting strategy, Marvin Miller was able to outfox Major League Baseball and break the reserve clause and open up free agency, which is how it is that today you have players that are getting zillions of dollars. Many of them think they're getting zillions of dollars because they're good players. And I'm not putting anything beyond that. But there were great players before, and they weren't getting anything close to that. But it was that breakthrough. So several of us wanted to build a campaign. And so in the process of talking about who did we have to enlist into the campaign, I said, we need to reach George Will. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with George Will is a conservative Republican columnist. George Will and I probably agree on nothing except for one thing, baseball. This guy is a baseball fanatic. He knows baseball, and for reasons that I can't figure out, he is pro player. I mean, he is, right? And so I said, we need to enlist George Will. Now, you reach out to someone like that, you say, we're going to reach him because of what he would bring to the campaign, not because we like him, but because of what he brings to the campaign and doors that George Will might be able to open. As long as George Will is not sticking a knife in my back, we can work together. You mentioned Lynn Cheney, the same idea. There was nothing, there's actually nothing I really agree with Lynn Cheney about except Trump, right? And to the extent that she is prepared to oppose and put everything on the line, actually, to oppose Trump, then she can be an ally. These are allies that are allies in a tactical sense. They are allies in a particular battle. They are not strategic allies. They're not people that we're going home to dinner with, right? They're not people that we share a common vision of the future with. They are immediate opponents. And that's what we need to be thinking about in terms of united fronts, looking broadly. So there's no room for purity tests. We're going to have people that we disagree with and people we don't like. But we're going to have to work with them in order to defeat our opponents. That's the brilliance of the united front. When it's implemented the right way, it isolates the enemy. I was involved in 2000 and 2001 in a campaign called the Charleston 5 campaign. It was a campaign to free these dock workers from Charleston, South Carolina, and who had been set up by the Attorney General, who created an action and then jailed these dock workers for allegedly inciting to riot and rioting. And they were looking at hard time. If we hadn't won, some of them would just now be getting out of the joint. And we built a national campaign, and we enlisted all kinds of people. And we were able to even get the governor of South Carolina, who at that time was a Democrat, to distance himself from the Attorney General. We got city councils in South Carolina to distance themselves. These are not strategic allies, but we were able to get them on this particular thing. And we isolated the Attorney General so badly, I'm not sure that his mother even wanted to talk to him. And then we won. The state dropped the case, turned it into misdemeanors, and they got off with fines. We won. It can be done, but we have to always be thinking broadly. So you think about understanding your opponent's weaknesses, divisions you can create there, and then think about who we can win that has an interest in moving against our opponents. Hold on a second. Anyone that has not spoken? Yes? Yeah. Can't hear you. Good.
Testing, testing.
Uh-oh.
Haven't spoken one of these in a long time,
Yeah.
but I sound pretty good.
Yeah, you do.
Well, I want to thank you for speaking. I wasn't expecting you, but I just was walking down Park Boulevard and I said, hey, who's speaking tonight? One of the men said, Bill Fletcher. I said, well, sound like a worthy man to listen to.
Thank you.
So far, I get your main idea is something about a united front.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to know just who do you consider the enemy?
Trump and the MAGA forces. They're the immediate enemy. There are always other enemies. But I was talking to some folks last night, and I think about it like this. If you're walking down an alley, and there's several people coming at you, you have to decide who you're going to hit.
First.
Right.
Right.
And you want to hit them hard so they bleed.
Right.
Right? You're not going to try to hit all of them at the same time. You got to figure out that's what I'm talking
Who's
about.
the biggest, who's the baddest? Yeah.
Right? And who represents the immediate threat to you, right? So you may not want to hit the person that looks the weakest because the others were saying, but
Right.
you hit someone, maybe the leader or someone else,
Exactly.
and you, right? And that's what we got to be thinking about. So Trump and the MAGA forces, it's beyond Trump himself.
Right, absolutely.
That's the thing we got to keep in mind. I mean, Trump, who knows what's going on in his head? I mean, there's speculation that it's sort of like Al Capone, you know, the undiagnosed syphilis, right? There's other things that might be going on in his head, right? We don't know. But what we do know is that whether Trump is there or not, there are other characters out there that represent the same politics and are smoother, right? And so we're actually up against a movement, and that movement needs to be crushed.
Okay. So I will have a follow-up question
Go for
for you,
it.
Mr. Fletcher. Would you consider the enemy the powers that be, the government?
I would say the ultimate enemy is capitalism. And so capitalism is an amoral system, and it is a threat to humanity.
Almighty dollar, yes, sir.
Right, it is.
Yeah.
But capitalism, saying that I'm anti-capitalist is like saying, which I am, but it's also like saying I'm against all those people in that alley.
Money does make the world go round. You need the paper, right?
Well, you need an economy, but you need an economy in a situation where you want humanity to survive. And if the MAGA forces win, and they're very clear in this Project 2025, and I want to encourage you to take a look at it. The document is like 900 pages, but you can go through it, and under the environment, they are very clear. They want to get rid of all environmental regulations. They want to make it easier for companies to pollute, to go after fossil fuels, et cetera. In other words, they want us to die. Now let me take it to somewhere that may sound really strange, because I've been really wondering, why are these characters like, what's his name from Twitter, from X, Musk, why are they like obsessed with Mars? Now I know why I'm obsessed with Mars, right? Because I'm into science fiction. I'm a Trekkie and everything, right? I'm really into that stuff. But why are they into that? And the conclusion I've come to is that they see the earth as dying. And what they want is to create a situation where people like them can escape.
Absolutely.
Right? There was actually a commercial film like that called Elysium with Matt Damon a number of years ago. And I think that they actually believe that they want to create a situation where they can escape. And so they're ready, willing to drive things down to destroy the planet as long as they can make the almighty dollar. We've got to stop them. I'm sorry? Building what? Yes. No, I'm serious. I do think that they are thinking about leaving Earth and repositioning themselves somewhere else. Obviously, they can't get it. We don't have the technology, you know, to go into deep space. But their obsession with going to Mars and other places is very different than, you know, real trained astrophysicists and others, or people like the late Carl Sagan, who were really thinking in more humanitarian terms. They're thinking about, hey, we're destroying the planet. We got to get out of here. That's why we got to stop them.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. They're prepared to leave us behind. Yeah. There's no place for them to go on Earth. They're going to have to leave the planet. And it's madness. It is madness. And we've got to stop them. This is no joke. I've been saying we're in a DEFCON 1 situation right now.
Okay.
These folks are prepared to take really dramatic steps. And there's a term that someone told me recently called anticipatory compliance. And it was from this book on tyranny. And the basic idea is that many populations, when faced with a right-wing threat, begin to assume that the right-wing threat or victory is inevitable. And they begin to comply in advance with the right. They let down their guard. They assume that there's nothing that can be done. And that's what I started to see, at least until Harris announced. But there's still people around that don't really believe that we can win. And winning is twofold. One is destroying MAGA, and the second is moving down along the lines that my friend from DSA was articulating. We've got to change the system, and ultimately we have to get rid of capitalism.
Okay, excuse me, Mr. Fletcher. That leads me to my last question. What would you say is the solution, other than what
He's
is our
asking what's the
solution?
solution?
Solutions.
What's the next question? No, I'm just joking. The solution is that we need an economic and political system that where there is real popular people's control, and where decisions that are made not just focus on what people want, but what the planet needs. And so, in other words, we have to change the system radically. And people like Musk, Bezos, and others stand in the way. And the MAGA movement wants to eliminate people like us.
Like us?
That's right, like us.
Who's us?
Look in the mirror, bro.
I said, who's us?
That's right. People that do not correspond to their view of a Christian state, a subservient population of color, subservient women. That's who the us is. Thank you, and you can call me Bill. All right.
Well, I've been on this planet for 82 years. I've seen it all, you know, Richard Nixon and all this. So what I feel, what I've seen, you know, again, you said, you know, they're holding on because we're going through another age. They won't win. But the thing is, we have to change ourselves from within.
Yes.
Or we'll have the same thing over and over again. So taking ourselves, because it's us, it's humans, with greed, with all, you know, so they've just gotten away, you know, way with it, you know, but we're all them. We all had the greed, you know, and we're not ready to serve humanity. I had a hard time putting this center together. Where were you? So I'm just saying that we need to take time to give thanks and praises to the earth mother. Take time in the morning when you get up to meditate. I don't care what religion, whatever, it's the same. And go inside yourself. What's happening at your house is an indicator of how you are. We got to, if you're not getting along at home, and if you're not respecting your wife or your husband, your children, we could do it within our house first. So we have to clean up. This earth have to clean up its consciousness. So, I mean, thank you so much for what you're doing But this is a whole spiritual thing. They're not spiritual. That's the problem. And they've hidden spirituality. You know, they've taken some of our precious symbols. You know, the Germans were smart. They studied Tibetan Buddhism. They studied ancient African wisdom. You know, so we have to get all that back. They switched. The swastika is in Native American. If you look in their religion, into African, all that. They stole a lot of secrets, and that's why they studied levitation. They studied all our stuff. And so does, you know, Mr. 45 and his crew. He's like a puppet. But there, like you said, there's some serious people.
Oh, yeah.
There's some serious people behind him. So you have to take your time to know who you are spiritually. I don't care if you look and do your qigong, your chai, take care of yourself spiritually. You know, and that's, you know, I'm not talking about the churches and all those people that has taken our knowledge and money and everything. It's there. When you walk on the earth, it's there. You know, taking your time and walking barefoot on earth. The wind, you know, the ocean, all that. They're trying to take that away from us. But it's right there on earth. You know, just get out and breathe. You know, thank the Mother, Earth Mother, and know yourself and ask for forgiveness and give thanks all the time. When you wake up, give thanks to the Creator for you waking up. And if you look at some of the, you know, Native American prophecies, I was with the Hopis. You know, no joke. The Hopis are no joke. They predicted that. You got the Dogon tribe, and the Dogon tribe. You got ancient Kemet, the Egyptians. They stole the name. The Greeks said Rowan, but it's Kemet. That's ancient Kemet. If you look, they even stole the Dendra, that calendar. So you gotta just study, know who we are, and study your true history. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's starting to get late. I see a hand of someone that didn't speak. And so,
I have some from the online community.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, so this comes from an Alex. They say, what do you think of Indivisible's strategy and plan to defeat fascists and save democracy? And then I guess a follow-up real quick would be, how do we counter armed fascists at the ballot box, and could it be done peacefully?
I don't know the details of Invisible strategy, so I wouldn't want to comment on that. Well, let me say in terms of the issue of encountering armed fascists, what you don't do. You don't play with violence. You don't hold press conferences announcing what you're going to do. You make sure to protect your people by whatever means you have to do that. You understand, so for example, if you go to a demonstration and someone says, I'm going to throw a rock at that fascist, you grab that person and you make sure that they are nowhere near the fascists. Because they might be a cop, they might be some sort of other provocateur, but in either case, they're going to create problems. So there has to be a lot of discipline. One of the interesting groups of the South was Deacons for Defense, which was a self-defense group of African Americans that protected many civil rights workers. They didn't hold press conferences. But people knew that they were around. The biggest thing is going to be numbers. If Harris wins, as I expect that she will, we need to be out in the streets in the hundreds of thousands celebrating. And that's one way to throw the fascists off, in the hundreds of thousands. Not just like a few people throwing a party, right? In the hundreds of thousands. Mass mobilizations are very effective in blunting them. We also need to make use of the state. We need to demand, for instance, that election officials, electoral officials, are protected. You know, when you have fascist groups intimidating secretaries of state or others, where's the defense? We need to insist that they're there, and we also need to be there to offer our help. So those are some of the things that I would say, at least publicly. Sure. Go ahead. And then I'm going to wrap it up.
Catch back up on my train of thought. I'm still thinking. Give me a second. So regarding what you were talking about with the right wing, I mean the fascists coming back. So this is something that when I was younger, I had a real interest in how all like World War II stuff happened. Like how did an entire country get convinced to commit the things that they did?
Right.
And so I researched into that and kind of watched it go past that and go a little bit underground, and I mean to a certain extent not completely underground. But I do, since about 2015 that I started seeing Trump winning, and even a little bit prior to that, but especially with Trump, I genuinely think, and I don't know if they put it in these terms, that they're attempting for the Fourth Reich right now. Like they learned their lessons from the third one, and that is that, I mean, mass and very evidence-found genocide is bad PR. So they're going to let the environment do it. So like how you're talking about, they're going to let climate change, because you look at the climate change, the countries that are going to be most affected, it's the non-white countries. It is the lower socioeconomic status countries. They're building bunkers. They're trying to go to the moon. If you look into like tech bros and their whole point of view around transhumanism and all that, it's not very inclusive. It's very, very selective about who it's for. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And another thing I wanted to mention in regards to someone that asked the question, like, what's the solution? And I think I mentioned this a little bit, I think another day, regarding solutions and how some of the things, like how, where she was talking about how we need to get like in touch with ourselves and our have everything at home going good. I think those things are great and absolutely true. But they're a little bit like more higher level. I think on a smaller level, on a more detail-oriented level, is to gum up the system. Like if you have an opportunity to like stop someone who is fascist to get on a school board, let's say, or help them help be able to prevent certain people from getting certain access to media, just gumming up the system to the point where it slows them down to, and just every chance you can. There's enough of us doing that, little things here and there, just screwing up, losing papers, not delivering something, whatever it is, little things like that can all build up to be a strategy that ends up slowing them down enough to where we can get the edge. I believe, and
Yeah.
I guess I just wanted to get on a soapbox here. So
No, that's
I
fine.
didn't have a question.
So I'll
Thank
add
you for
to
coming
that.
here, though.
Thank you. I'll add to that and then move us towards wrapping up. A few different things. One is we should use comedy in attacking the right. That may sound very strange, but comedy, you listen to George Carlin, for example, the late George Carlin, who I miss every day, and the biting critique of the system that he carried out using comedy. we should use it. There was a group in Pittsburgh a few years back that they came to a fascist demonstration dressed as clowns. And every time the fascists would yell, "white power," the clowns would respond. And so they said, "Oh, white powder," and they'd throw white powder at the fascists, right? And these fascists they just couldn't take it, right? They just kind of unraveled. When Walls called Vance and Trump weird, do you realize how that is caught on around the country? And it's like, well, of course. It's like, almost like, well, why didn't I think about that, right? It's something that was the right kind of thing that touched people. And you make use of that because part of what we're trying to do is ideologically destroy them. We want to get inside and become their worst nightmare. And comedy and things like that, it really does help, it contributes. So I wanted to add that to what you raised. The second thing is about what Sister Makeda was raising. We have to transform humanity. And interesting, the fascists of the 20s and 30s saw themselves as transforming humanity, but in a really, really bad way, right? But they would talk about transforming. The current fascists, actually interesting, aren't talking about transforming humanity. They're talking about, they have these like, it's sort of like the future is in the past. And we have to be the ones that are articulating the necessity for humanity to transform. It's not just the transformation of the relations of production, it's the transformation of our relationship to Earth. It's our transformation of our relationship to other people and our ambitions. I mentioned before that I'm a Star Trek fan. I've seen every Star Trek film and every series. And in Star Trek First Contact, Captain Picard encounters someone from the 21st century. And she says, she sees the Enterprise, and she says, "How much did this cost?" And he says, "The economics of the 24th century are different from your own. The acquisition of wealth is not the driving force in human affairs." I was sitting in a theater when I heard it. I said, "Oh, shit," right? I couldn't believe it, right? But that's exactly right. The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in human affairs. That is the future that we need to be fighting for. That needs to be central to our anti-fascism and to our vision of socialism. So I want to close with that, and then finally close with one other thing, which is very self-interested, sort of. I have written nonfiction for years, and a number of years ago, I decided I was going to do fiction. And I did that for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons was that there was a whole part of me that it wasn't out there. It was stuck. And I decided I was going to write a novel, a murder mystery. And when I started writing it, it's called The Man Who Fell from the Sky. Many of my friends, I got 3 reactions. One reaction was like from my wife and daughter. They said, "Yes, go for it." Okay, that's good. Then there was another reaction, which was what I call the toothpick smile reaction. And that's, everyone has seen this. It's where someone forces themselves to smile. And they don't want to smile, but they force themselves and say, "Oh, that's a really great idea." And you know they think you're nuts, right? And the third response was sort of, "Oh, that's interesting, pass the ketchup." And then very little support for writing. When the book came out, a number of people, including people who had given me the toothpick smiles, came up to me and they quietly said, Bill, you know what? I'd actually like to write a book too. And I discovered something. And I put $1 to a donor that each of you have a book in your head, at least one book that you want to write. At least one book, maybe fiction, nonfiction. You have at least one story you want to tell. And you're probably saying to yourself, yeah, but I could never be that good, right? Well, I've heard that before, right? I've said it. I can never be like Raymond Chandler. I can never be like Walter Mosley. I can never be like Octavia Butler. And that's right, I can't. I can't be like Bill Fletcher. And I started thinking about this story I'd once heard about Malcolm X, who I thought and think was one of the greatest orators I'd ever heard, only to hear that he listened regularly to records from Paul Robeson to learn how to speak. Malcolm didn't become another Paul Robeson, he became Malcolm X. And I, for years, wanted to be able to speak like Malcolm X. I tried, and I could never do it until I realized I spoke like Bill Fletcher. And the same with writing, that you can write yourselves and you become your own writer. You don't compare yourself to someone else. You write, you find it in you. So I want to encourage, I want to do two things. One is self-interested. So I have one copy of my latest book. And I only brought one because I couldn't fit more in my bag. But this is the second of the two, and it's called The Man Who Changed Colors. It's about race, justice, revenge, and it's centered in Cape Verdean Americans. How many of you know who Cape Verdeans are? All right. For those of you that don't, they're the first post-1492 African population to come to the New World voluntarily. They did not come as slaves. And they're a very interesting population. They started coming when they were controlled by Portugal. And I decided I wanted to talk about race by looking at a population of African descent that were not the descendants of slaves, were not Protestants, did not speak English initially, and their experience and the complications, helping us to understand that race is not just a typical black-white dichotomy, it's much more complicated, and it's all made up fundamentally. So I want to encourage you to write, and once you do, I promise you, you'll look at yourself in a different way, and you will experience a level of joy it's indescribable. In any case, I want to thank you all very much.
Yeah, we want to appreciate everybody who is here with us, and especially to Makeda and team for the hospitality to have us here. Thank you so much. The other thing we want to announce, a little advertisement. We have some books written by Bill with Fletcher over there in the table. They are open for sale, and take advantage of he's here to dedicate it. You have to ask him. Yeah. The other thing is, in case you guys feel like you want to eat something, it's a way to appreciate the hospitality of the place, the Gorbit Center, which is always open for people like you guys. Then still I can imagine some food, some other stuff, a way to support the center. And thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And we see you in the battle we have in front. Thank you.